59 participants at this point, which is very exciting. We're looking forward to a good discussion after our presentation. We will probably take about half the time presenting, and then hopefully there will be lots of questions that will come up that we can get a good discussion going. But we thought it would be nice to introduce ourselves individually first, and then leap into a set of slides and then presenting, kind of showing you what our project is all about, 1 square mile, 10,000 voices. And then, like I said, we'll transition to a Q&A at the end. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Halsey Burgund. I am one of the 2 co-directors of 1 square mile, 10,000 voices. I am primarily a sound artist, an audio artist, and technologist. I use a lot of different technologies, including AR and other cutting edge technologies to create primarily audio pieces. And a lot of my audio pieces are contributory in nature, where I gather voices from participants and use those in various performances and installation work. I'm a fellow at the MIT Open Documentary Lab now, and doing a lot of work with them, exploring new forms of documentary. So I will leave it at that for myself. I'll hand over to Sue for a second, and then we'll hop into the presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sue Ting. I'm a documentary filmmaker and immersive media creator, primarily based in Los Angeles. I work in all forms of nonfiction media, from broadcast, public television, documentaries to virtual reality. I'm really interested in exploring new forms of documentary storytelling, whether that's through new technology or experimental approaches. And I am a senior civic media fellow at USC's Annenberg School.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully my presentation will be properly displayed. I'm going to leave it to you, John and Christine, to pipe up if there's something that seems wrong.
It looks fine to me. So
good, excellent,
great.
Excellent, good. Well, thank you. So again, as has been stated, our project that we're going to talk about today is called 1 square mile, 10,000 voices. That's the title refers to the square footage of the Manzanar historic site, which is a Japanese incarceration camp that is where the focus of our project is, and 10,000 voices refers to the number of individuals who were incarcerated at that location. Essentially, our project is I'll take care of these first 3 bullets all in one mouthful, a location-based participatory audio documentary. And we're going to get into all the details of what we mean by that. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about how it came up and how we got the idea for it. Sue and I mentioned I am a fellow at the Open Documentary Lab at MIT, and Sue was a student there, now a proud alum of the Open Documentary Lab, and we met there we have weekly meetings and whatnot, and it turns out that Sue and I were interested in a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same uses of technology to create immersive storytelling and whatnot. And Sue's thesis was on contributory sort of technologies that could be used to create immersive stories, immersive documentaries. And I'm not going to try to tell you what her thesis was about, but it was a great connection that we had between ourselves. And then after she graduated, she came out to LA, as she mentioned, and visited Manzanar. And I think maybe it was the day after she visited Manzanar, I'm not sure, but she called me up and said, hey, there's this place that I went to, and it's this amazing sort of tragic in many ways story, but such an evocative location. And what do you think about using some of the ideas that we've talked about in the past for putting voices on site in a physical place to kind of have the voices enhance the site and the site enhance the voices, and kind of try to tell the story of what happened to all the individual people who were brought to this very remote location, Japanese Americans, and and forced into a situation that was not of their choice. Again, we'll get more into those details, but I was very immediately intrigued by that idea, by the notion of using oral histories, voices that have been collected from these individuals, and sort of placing them back on the site where they came from, if you will, and trying to create a bit of a nonlinear experience for people visiting that site. So there are three components to our piece. I've mentioned Manzanar, which is the one of the physical sites that is outside of LA. What is it, 3 hours, I believe, drive sort of northeast of LA, and that's where a bunch of the one of the sites we have. We also decided to use Little Tokyo in LA as another site for our piece. There's obviously more people who have access to the site in LA, and of course Little Tokyo was the location where many of the individuals who ended up at Manzanar came from, so there's a very direct tie-in to that physical site as well. And then we wanted to see what we could do to expand viewership, so to speak, beyond people who are able to travel to the actual physical site. That is one of the challenges of augmented reality, of course, is that you need to be there on site. So we tried to, we built a website that's a sort of beta website, which I'll be taking you through, which also shares a lot of these stories in a different way, of course, but we hope it augments the project overall. So those are the three components. And now I guess I'll turn it over to Sue for a little bit of the background on the site, and just let me know when you want me to advance the slides, Sue, or I can do it as I feel makes sense.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I mean, I think many of the participants today will be familiar with the history of Manzanar, with the history of Japanese American incarceration in the United States. But for those of you who are not, a very brief overview. In 1942, the United States government forcibly relocated approximately 120,000 men, women, and children and detained them in military-style camps scattered across the country, largely located at very harsh, remote locations. Manzanar, as Halsey mentioned, at the foot of the Sierra Nevada in California's Owens Valley, was one of the largest camps, and more than 10,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated there. And housed in barracks that were scarcely habitable, suffering from extreme weather in winter and summer, and of course incarcerated against their will, surrounded by barbed wire. And so today, these are some of the barracks that you're seeing that they were housed in. It's a scale model at the Japanese American National Museum. Now, soon after the war, everything was torn down. And this is a satellite image of what the site looks like today. There were decades of activism by the Japanese American community to have the site acknowledged. And so it was finally named a National Historic Site in 1992. And today, Halsey, if you want to advance, there's some small exhibits. There's a visitor center with some interpretive exhibits, some films, and there's the cemetery. 146 Japanese Americans died at Manzanar. Only 5 graves remain, as most were reburied, but the cemetery is an important, obviously, site there. And there's a few reconstructed buildings and barracks for people to view, as well as archaeological ruins scattered around the site, and informational panels and things like that. So today the site is largely empty physically. It's largely scrub. There's not pathways through a lot of the site, but of course it's not empty of meaning. There's archaeological sites that are archaeological research that's ongoing. There's important historical importance to the site itself, and so that's kind of where our project stems from. So one of our driving questions was, how can we use interactive storytelling, which is something that we're both interested in, to enhance the experience of historical sites? And so some of our goals to begin with, as we started thinking about how to approach this project, were to foster cross-cultural, intergenerational dialogue around civil rights, around community resistance, and around storytelling, you know, around memory, around how stories are exchanged, around the power of storytelling. There was a lot of silence around what had happened there for many generations. So we also were interested in facilitating public engagement with historic materials and sites. Sort of the idea of using audio recordings to illuminate physical spaces as primary documents in and of themselves, while being in a physical landscape also adds a lot of important context to experiencing archival material like oral history materials or archival audio. And also bringing those materials out into the physical landscape. Often they're kind of hidden away in archives that are not necessarily accessible to everyone. We are also interested in collecting a wide range of user-generated stories. Oral history archives, especially in this case, due to the activism of the community involved, are extensive, but there are still many voices that are not represented. And so we're interested in kind of looking at new ways to gather oral history, new ways to engage people in that process. We are also interested in increasing engagement at Manzanar National Historic Site. So many visitors, in our discussions with National Park Service, we heard that many visitors primarily visit the interpretive center, the small museum, maybe go around some of the barrack exhibits, and then they feel like they've completed the site. They've seen what there is to see. And, you know, National Park Service, the interpretive staff there are really interested in encouraging people to explore the site further, to experience it for themselves, to walk around, to kind of go past the kind of default exhibits. And so we were interested in kind of working with them to figure out what are ways to do that. This also obviously just increases the choices for self-guided offerings for visitors who might visit when the interpretive center is closed, and things like that. And also, you know, in making it a participatory experience where users can record their own stories, we find that that results in more substantive engagement with both historical materials and perhaps people that they visit the site with. There's more sort of ownership of the experience and kind of personal stakes involved. And finally, you know, as artists, as creators, we're both interested in just exploring strategies for location-based and participatory storytelling. A lot of this work is new, a lot of it is exploratory. You know, there is no kind of guidebook on how to do location-based or contributory experiences. It's all kind of a work in progress. So this is a way for us to kind of explore some of the ideas that we're interested in and see how they work in practice.
Thanks, Sue. I can now start to explain a little bit about some of the strategies we took. As Sue mentioned, we are experimented with a lot of this. I think that's one of the wonderful things about being creators, being artists, directors, filmmakers, being in the creative space here. It's wonderful to be able to experiment, and, you know, not having the guidebook, as Sue referred to, is of course nerve-wracking at times. You never really know how things are going to come out, but there's also the tremendous upside of doing something, you know, something new, something innovative, something that pushes certain forms forward a little bit in certain directions, and that you learn from. And, you know, hopefully a lot of the learnings are good, but even if they end up being something to learn not to do, that's also a learning. And I've certainly done a lot of that in my day. But right now, these next two slides are illustrative of the way that we thought about laying out the audio on the site. You can recognize this map as a satellite image of the 1 square mile. The yellow border is effectively the 1 square mile of Manzanar. It's quite open and you know, sort of desert sort of wasteland a bit now, but at the time it was filled with, you know, 10,000 people, which is you know, not a ton of space for that many people. And The approach we took was to use, of course, the amazing trove of oral histories that had been collected over many years by the National Park Service and a number of other organizations to preserve a lot of this history, and use those and sprinkle those throughout the site. But also, before I get to those, I wanted to talk about sort of the glue that we wanted to, the oral glue, if you will, to keep everything together, which is some musical and some sort of ambient sound scape that we have created for the site, which will be based on where you're located on the site. It will change, and it will kind of hold all of the oral histories, the voices together into one continuous experience. We didn't want to have the experience be people wandering around a site and then all of a sudden this voice pops into their earbuds and saying something, and it might seem a little bit out of place. So we wanted to create a continuous experience which had voices kind of filtering in and out based on, again, where you're located, but also have this sort of sound bed of an ambient musical / field recording type score that it could hold everything together. So this slide sort of shows the different regions of the site that we have sort of focused on from a sort of topic standpoint out of the parking lot and sort of the arrival to the site. We put, we were thinking of stories of arrival, people talking about what their lives were like before they got to the camp. Some material from the government that was put out at the time, sort of propaganda-ish type material about this topic. As you move, this is the visitor center right here, and as you move beyond that, there's a very accessible area of the site that has the basketball court and the mess hall and a few of these rebuilt buildings. And we wanted to put in stories, lots of stories of domestic life in the camp. The cemetery is way back here on the lower left, and the hospital is kind of down in this region as well. So we felt there was really this sort of corridor that people generally would walk along to get from, if they're walking, you can drive as well. There's a road that goes around the edge. But if they're walking, there's kind of a central corridor that people can walk along, and it passes by the orchard and the previous location of the children's village and nearby the hospital to get to the cemetery. So we thought that we would populate some of those areas with voices as well, more or less. And then, of course, there were stories that were talked specifically about certain locations that we tried to repopulate them in those locations as best we could. This next slide, again, same view of the location of the site, but each of these pins represents a section of story and audio clip. And obviously there's a high concentration in the areas that I was talking about. We did want to put some in farther flung areas, and this is not completely done yet. We're still experimenting with different distributions of the content, but we wanted to focus on the areas that I just mentioned. So hospital down here, cemetery. We have not only oral histories, but we also have recordings that Sue and I made of events that have happened on site. There was the pilgrimage, the annual Manzanar pilgrimage that actually we attended two of those, right? So you attended two, I attended one, and we've got a bunch of recordings of that to kind of repopulate, and then some other events that were related as well. We captured and have, again, repopulated, put back on site. So at a high level, the audio experience is one that is sort of an ambient bed of audio, musical and sort of field recording type sounds, and then these voices that kind of come in and out as you wander throughout the location. So next slide, website demo. So as mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we have a few different components, and I wanted to walk you through the website, and then I will walk you through the mobile app. The website is in beta form now, but it is available at onesquaremile.fm and has some of the core features available there. So I am going to pop out of this tab and go into another tab, which is hopefully the website. Can somebody give me a thumbs up, Sue? Are we on the website looking?
Yes, we are looking at the website.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so I'll just take you through this quite quickly. Just some information about the project. There are two main features of the website: listening to other voices, listening to the audio experience, and then, as we've mentioned several times, there's a speak functionality, so people can leave their own thoughts about, reactions to the experience or thoughts about Manzanar, etc. I do want to take this time to mention the amazing and incredible support that we were able to get for this project from California Humanities and from the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, both of whom were extremely generous and enabled this whole project to happen. So to highlight them here, of course, on the website, but then also with you guys. So I will go to the listen functionality first, and you'll notice this looks like the screenshot in the oh, maybe my internet's a little slow here. Zoom always does things. All right, there we go. Okay, so we have the site again, and on top of the actual site, we have overlaid a sort of graphical map that shows where some of the features of the site were at the time when it was occupied. So I'm going to just play some. These pink squares are areas that we determined to be of interest. So in the website, you can't obviously walk around the site when you're, well, you could if this was on a phone, but the point of this website is for sort of being able to browse if you're not there. So we decided that there were a few areas that were of particular interest that we would want people to be able to listen to voices some. So I am going to hope that the audio gets piped through here and through Zoom, and we can listen to a little bit of what this sounds like.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air.
We will interrupt all program.
That was obviously a historical recording.
Right away, first thing hit my mind, there's going to be talk about putting all the Arabs in internment camps. And there was some talk about it, wasn't there? Rounding up the Muslims and putting them in camp. That's what I first thought. But it's a good thing it never happened. And it shouldn't happen.
Crying and hugging and goodbyes and all that.
Yesterday, I was pleased that Bruce Embry, during his speech, brought up the Chinese Exclusion Act, saying this is the first time that the United States excluded an entire group of people based on where they were coming from.
Over to the hospital now.
I just don't remember seeing him there. I saw him in January, 43, but not at the time, because at that time, Dr. Goto was chief medical officer, and after he testified at the Military Board of Inquiry on the shootings, the military and even the administration got so shook up at his truthful testimony that the shots were coming from the side or from the back, showing that they were fleeing or attempting to flee. And when he refused to change the story at the Military Board of Inquiry, the administration military got so angry, they said, well, this guy's got to go. Otherwise, it's going to make us look bad.
So you can hear their little snippets of stories, different, you kind of do jump in and out of these stories. It's a bit nonlinear, obviously even more so when we're doing this quick demo here, but hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of content that are in there. You heard some historic content, US government sort of propaganda type, some stories like the one from the hospital, and then some indications of there was one recording that we did on site of a present day event that happened last year, I believe. So that is the basic way to sort of navigate the listening part of the website. The speak part of the website is where people can make recordings. And we have a few prompts that we've asked people to respond to here. Choosing one of these, share a story related to Manzanar. How does Manzanar's legacy connect to current social and political issues? How does being at Manzanar make you feel, or record something you hear? So if you select a recording, you can put your recording anywhere you want. You know, if you're not on site, obviously I'm not on site, so it's taking my current location, and it's quite a straightforward interface. You have a minute, you can talk for a minute. I'm not going to submit this recording because it is not very exciting, but the idea is that you can talk here and then you can listen to it back. It's a straightforward, in any case, you get the point. I'm not going to upload it, but were you to upload it, it would go into the system, and then it would be something that Sue and I could listen to, and would be available to other folks as part of the experience. So that is I'm not going to go, we don't need to do the team part of the site. I think very quickly I will share my iPhone screen here to show you there is a similar app. The big difference between the website and the app is really, it's a mobile thing. So the idea for the app is primarily to be able to wander around the site itself, press play on the app, and then put the phone in your pocket, and then just wander around, being able to take in all the sights and smells and feelings of the place, of Manzanar itself, and have the audio just sort of enhance that experience. We find that audio AR in particular is really, really good at creating a sort of enhancing a physical environment in a way that doesn't detract from it. Sometimes, you know, the magic window on a phone or audio or sort of visual AR pieces, sometimes the technology becomes a little too, it gets in the way a little too much, and we just like the idea of augmenting through audio, so your eyes are unimpeded and can still look around and take in the entirety of the site. So in any case, the mobile app, which is intended to be used on site, either at Manzanar or Little Tokyo, has the same two features. The listen feature takes you to a map, which I'm going to. Right now, I created a sort of somewhat different version for this demo, so we could actually move around in the map instead of, obviously we're not walking around, but here are all the recordings, and same idea with playing and listening. You can listen to different stories as you wander through.
Funny things to it. It even took a roof off of the toilet. We laughed so hard. Just lifted it up and dropped it. Oh, we laughed so hard. It was a men's, it wasn't a women's.
So lots of stories there. The speak side is much the same questions. You can make a recording and it gets memorialized for all time on site, which I will not do with this recording. But again, this is just to show you that there's two ways of kind of getting at the content, slightly different reasons to have a mobile-centric experience and a web browser type experience. So I'm going to now attempt to get back to my slide deck. Sorry, give me 1 second. So you saw this, I already did the mobile app, and I will hand it back to Sue to talk about the challenges.
Great. So, you know, you saw the demo. Clearly, these are sort of works in progress. And there have been a lot of challenges that we've encountered along the way. So one is how to curate lots of content and relate it to the physical site in a way that makes sense for participants. You know, there are hundreds, probably thousands of hours of oral histories. Well, actually, definitely thousands of hours of oral histories around this site. And, you know, how do we dive into that? How do we make sense of that for both ourselves and participants? And so here we really relied on the work of organizations that have come before us, you know, especially National Park Service, of course, that's been conducting oral histories for many years, as well as the Den Show Archive, which is largely digitized and available online, and sort of looking at how they had curated material, how they had organized material. We also experimented a lot with different kinds of filtering, different prompts for participants. So for example, you know, Halsey mentioned that it's a non-linear experience. So we are locating material that is related to a specific location near those locations. So if someone is speaking about the hospital or about the latrines, we're trying to situate those stories there, but then there is general material that is not, you know, it's not a specific linear path that people are supposed to trace throughout the site. And so balancing those sort of things is, you know, still a work in progress. And then how to encourage physical and content exploration without requiring it. So largely this is a question of accessibility. We want to cater to those who would be open to wandering across sort of the rougher terrain, exploring, you know, walking around for a long time, and those who would be more comfortable kind of staying on the accessible pathways that are close to the interpretive center. We also, you saw the sort of balloons on the app that show where material is located. And so the idea is not that they're looking at those dots that when they're wandering, the idea is that they're looking around and taking in the site, but they're able to, within the app, see where content is located, and then that will inform their decision about, oh, well, there is stuff over there, or you know, oh, I could just stay here because I see that there's a lot of material here for me to explore. Another big question is how to collaborate between stakeholders from very different fields. You know, Halsey and I, we come from different spaces primarily, and so how to communicate about technological issues, workflow, and then of course, outside our small team, working with the National Park Service, working with the Manzanar Committee, and just, you know, kind of taking into account everyone's different backgrounds and levels of comfort with technology, so that everyone's expectations and sort of communication is just on the same page. And how can we create a meaningful offsite experience? Obviously, many people are not able to visit Manzanar. It's pretty far from LA. You need a car, or there are buses that are chartered sometimes. So, you know, even though we definitely want people to visit the site, we also want to offer a version of the experience for people who are unable to visit. So thinking about how we are able to create a version of the experience online, or in a different physical location, as with the Little Tokyo sort of satellite installation that retains the core elements of the project, but is adapted for the kind of capabilities of a different platform. And then of course, how to connect past and present political moments without being too heavy-handed. There is an obvious relevance between what happened at Manzanar, what happened during World War II, and present day civil rights struggles. Most obviously last summer, there was a Trump administration plan to put migrant children in the former incarceration camp at Fort Sill. So these are very direct links to between the past and present. And we wanted to gesture at that. Of course, those links are part of what makes the site such a powerful place to visit, but also not sort of, you know, be too heavy-handed about it. And so one thing that we decided to do is that we did not have present day journalistic material or kind of government speeches or things like that. We wanted to keep the focus on people's personal experiences. Halsey, did you have anything to add?
No, that was great. Thank you. That was excellent. So we will go to the, why is my, oh, there we go. We got the next slide. So yeah, I can take this one just briefly. If there's interest in sort of the tools and resources that we use to create this project, obviously we've mentioned the oral history archives that we have had access to, which everybody has access to. They are publicly available through the National Park Service, et cetera. And those were a wonderful, crucial resource for us. Obviously, we did a lot of recording on site and had a bunch of portable recording equipment, different kind of Zoom than we're on right now. Audio editing software, you know, I've spent many a hour, many a day, 20 a week, listening to these amazing stories and slicing up the sort of chunks of them, little pieces of, that sort of made sense in and of themselves, sort of as little capsules that were what got spread around the site. We didn't want to have, hour-long recordings there because it's better to have a more variety of different stories, we felt, than longer single stories. And then finally, Roundware. Roundware is the name of the contributory audio augmented reality platform that we use for this. It's actually something that I've been developing over many years, probably 12 years at this point, to create the sorts of experiences that we have talked about today. It is, you can see the URL there in the lower left, roundware.org. It is an open source platform. There are clients for iOS and for the web, and if anybody's interested in learning more about those technicalities, I'm always happy to discuss that. But that obviously, Roundware's existence provided us a leg up in getting going on this this approach. Building everything from scratch is obviously a lot bigger of a lift. So that was helpful. So we thought that given this conference that we are a part of, that we would sort of end with sort of some kind of segue into a discussion. We are not ourselves historical preservationists. We hope that what we are, what our experiences have been are useful and interesting to you guys, and we're very excited to hear more about what your thoughts and questions are. But we thought we'd kick it off with just a few points here. Audio AR versus visual AR. I think we've hit on that a little bit as we've spoken. We've chosen to go with audio AR because of the ability for it to not get in the way as much and to create an immersive experience, more of an all-encompassing experience than a visual AR experience perhaps would. Not opposed to visual AR, but in this case felt like that was the site was so striking and so much to visually take in that was all that was needed from that standpoint. Participatory components. This is something that different organizations have different feelings about. We as coming at it from the sort of creative artistic standpoint, we gain a lot of inspiration from people contributing and giving us their own thoughts and experiences. Of course, you run various risks with that. You run the risk of people contributing something quote unquote inappropriate, depending on your definition of that. There are many ways that we moderate stuff as needed, but that is something that, again, not an expert, but I haven't seen a lot of that on my experiences with historic preservation, mainly because I would imagine because it's all about preserving things and perhaps a lot of contributions might somehow be detrimental to the preservation mission. But in our case, we feel that because these contributions are all sort of digital and existing in the cloud, so to speak, that there is not there's more of an opportunity to commingle between the physical and digital there. So Sue, I don't know if something just weird just happened on my computer. Hopefully that's not. Am I still sharing okay?
Yeah, I can still, there's a little bit of lag on your, and artifacting on your presentation, but it seems fine now.
Okay, sorry, my computer just got a little mad at me, but I guess, yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about the multifaceted approach to history, and then we can hand it over to questions.
Yeah, I would also add just quickly with the audio AR versus visual AR, that audio AR is also much more accessible just from a financial and technological standpoint, which I think is a concern for many historical sites, many nonprofits. They don't have huge budgets, and there is a significant cost differential between audio AR and visual AR. And so, so one of our kind of ideas about why this approach could be interesting from the perspective of historical preservation is that this is a really multifaceted approach to history. Often when you go to a historical site, you have a single authoritative linear reading of something that has happened in the past, you know, obviously represented through something like a timeline. And, you know, that's very useful and a necessary way to sort of organize and communicate and educate people about what has happened. But obviously history is much more complicated than that. There are many different perspectives. It's a conversation that's ongoing. We are absolutely still reckoning with the consequences of what happened at Manzanar and other camps. And so I think we really are interested in the idea of this being an evolving archive. People, you know, we're adding in content. We curated some initial content, but this is constantly evolving as people hear that content. They add their own stories. They respond to hearing stories that maybe other people have recorded. And so we think it's a much more, you know, it's a more democratic approach to the history, to the archive, that reflects the complexity of this conversation. And so that's sort of one of our goals or things that really appeal to us about this approach. So yeah, I think we can open it up to questions.
Great, thank you both. It was very enlightening presentations, and I'm gonna dive right into the questions because we had close to a dozen questions here. So strap in because we're going to be covering a lot of questions. So the first question is from Krista. She's asking if the narration has a role in the ambient bed, and she commented she's learning a new language. Ambient bed is in quotes.
Ambient bed, yes. I don't know how far you'll get at a party with that phrase, but yes, I'm glad that is interesting. As far as I'm not really, it was about the narration. There, I'm not sure. It might have been in reference to a specific voice that was heard in one of the demos, maybe.
Yeah, she might. Yeah, she's saying, does narration have a role to play at all? Like in terms of commentary by the curators, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think our approach is not that that the standard sort of curatorial authoritative voice isn't important. It's not that it isn't important. It's that there are other voices that are also important. So we like to try to kind of level the playing field, if you will, with regards to curatorial voices and visitor voices and people who are experiencing things. You know, the kids have amazing perspectives on things, and hearing what they think about a site can often be very enlightening in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's not meant to demote any kind of official curatorial perspective so much as it is to bring up other perspectives to that same level, if you will.
And just to clarify, so our project includes a range of voices, which is what Halsey is talking about, you know, from kind of official voices to people that are visiting the park today, but there is no narration in the traditional sense of, you know, us hiring someone to say, you know, this is Manzanar, which was established in, you know, there's none of that kind of narration in the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
thanks.
great.
And I did actually want to just briefly run through, I saw some kind of quick logistical questions, and I thought it'd be good to run through those really quickly because that might inform the other questions that people had.
Perfect.
So very quickly, augmented reality and virtual reality. I did see that question pop up. So definitely a point of confusion for many people, but essentially virtual reality is when people are in completely virtual environments. You put a headset on and you are entirely in a digitally created space. And then augmented reality is basically digital materials that are augmenting the real world. So Pokemon Go would be, you know, you're looking through your camera at the world around you, and then there's kind of digital graphics superimposed upon that. Our material is you're in the real world, you're walking around a physical environment, and then there's audio digital material. And then one of the other questions was, how is the material situated? It is situated using GPS. And yeah, I think those were just some of the basic questions that I thought it'd be good to kind of
you mind if I add a few to that in terms
Sure,
of
yeah.
Sure.
Is cellular coverage an issue in such a remote place, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, actually the cellular network is amazing because it's right next to the highway. So that was definitely something that when we went to our first site visit, we were like, this could make or break the project. Because if we don't have cell network, there is no Wi-Fi on site. So even in the interpretive center, so we were really dependent upon that. And for our budget for this project, you know, we definitely didn't have the capabilities, independent creators, to set up a whole, you know, independent network or anything like that.
Yeah, a very flat open area is good for cell coverage as well. So yeah, we were lucky.
And also, how often are you able to update the content, or is that reliant on what people contribute, or do you have to sort of manage that as well as you receive it?
Yeah,
Halsey, maybe you could take that. And I also saw
sure.
someone had a question about moderation, so maybe you can.
Oh, sure. Great. Yes.
Take those on at once.
Sure. Yeah. So the content is, I think, one of the whole sort of, you know, the ethos of the piece is, to a large degree, a sort of evolutionary one, whereby there will be more and more content that will be becoming part of the piece as it you know, is out there, and as people experience it, and as people choose to contribute. So that is something that you know, that will evolve over time. We will experience it ourselves and hear the kinds of feedback that comes in, and change the sort of curated part of it, as well as, of course, listen and assess, so to speak, any of the contributory comments that come in from the public. So we do, you know, we do feel that it's very important that the comments that are made go into the piece right away without us having to approve them. We use a system called what we refer to as post moderation. So we feel it's really important to tell people, potential contributors, that we value what their experience is, and we want to hear what they have to say. And I've found over the years that giving people this, you know, making it very clear this is the case, reduces people's desire and inclination to, you know, say something, again, inappropriate in quotes. I don't know what, it depends on what you think that means. But basically, when a new recording comes in, we get an email about it, and we can review it. And if it is somehow totally irrelevant or offensive or otherwise inappropriate, then we can, of course, take it out. But we feel that it's important to share the openness and make that clear with all the participants, that we do want to hear, and there isn't some major gauntlet that they need to pass through in order to create a comment that is, you know, worthy of being in the piece. And it's also really fun to make a recording and then upload it, and then, you know, wander around or tell your friends, oh, I left something over there, go find it. And that's really kind of a fun, real-time feedback kind of experience. So.
There was a question about the approach to the Little Tokyo piece of the project. And the question was how you were able to connect these remote incarceration centers to the communities that they disrupted or destroyed. And the comment that it's a very important part of this history. So did you encounter any challenges, or do you have any thoughts about approaching that part of the project?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think many of the people who went to Manzanar, as Halsey mentioned, came from Little Tokyo, were actually rounded up at buildings there and then brought up to Manzanar. So there is a direct link. And I think we wanted to make that link clear, as well as kind of dealing with topics that are specific to Little Tokyo currently. So there's a lot of gentrification happening. The community is fighting to basically to have Little Tokyo survive in the face of encroaching gentrification. And so discussing some of those issues, because they also relate to the core issues of this, which is, you know, the meaning of home, you know, community, resistance, things like that. And so kind of pulling out those larger themes while acknowledging kind of the specific environments of each location. Halsey, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add real quick that the content is essentially totally different actual pieces of content at Little Tokyo than on-site Manzanar. So the idea isn't to sort of reproduce Manzanar and kind of teleport you to Manzanar so much as it is to connect you thematically, as Sue was saying, with the material, and connect you both to Manzanar as well as, of course, to Little Tokyo itself. So we have a different set of content that we're distributing throughout Little Tokyo, which is that part of the project is not actually officially up and running just yet, but it will be soon when we release the app, and then folks can check that out on site there.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, actually, all three pieces of the project are not officially launched yet. So we had been, all three of them are sort of in process, and of course, you know, the current situation has sort of thrown our plans into disarray, as with many other projects. So at Manzanar, the interpretive center is currently closed, and so, you know, we're kind of waiting to see what will happen there. In Little Tokyo, we had been planning to launch the project with the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival, which is headquartered in Little Tokyo and takes place largely in that neighborhood, but the festival has been postponed. And then, of course, the website is in beta, but we're hoping to release it soon so that at least people can begin accessing the project through that.
Okay. Chris, I think you had a question that I thought I saw you say something. Maybe not. I had a question to present to our panel here. There was a question about well-known Japanese Americans who were in the internment camp, and George Takei and Doris Matsui were the examples that they gave. Did you think about maybe reaching out to them, or were they interested in being involved in recording their memories about the site, or was there any sort of involvement with sort of personalities or well-known people in the Japanese community?
Short answer is no, we did not reach out to them. From my perspective, and Sue, we haven't actually talked too much about this, but you know, this project is really about the stories of everyday people, and what we don't want is for people to come and be like, oh, George Takei said something over there, and then kind of get too, as brilliant as he is, you know, get too sort of caught up in the celebrity of things, because in my mind, George Takei has a story that is no doubt, you know, very interesting and tragic and all that, but no more so than XYZ other, you know, incarceree, and the notion that, you know, current day celebrity changes the validity of those stories is something we didn't want to really reinforce. So, you know, that said, if George Takei wanted to come and leave his story, it'd be fantastic, but we didn't really want to, you know, use that as a hook. That, I don't know, Sue, if you have other thoughts about that, but that's kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it hasn't really come up. I mean, certainly we would love for George Takei to come visit Manzanar and add his story to the piece, but definitely I think we wanted everything to be sort of on equal footing. Yeah.
Great.
And John, did you see Cindy Olnick, our friend Cindy Olnick, sent in a question that I could ask if we're ready?
Sure. Yeah,
okay, she's asking, how quickly is the tech evolving, and what do you imagine might be possible in the next generation and the next iteration of your project?
The tech, you know, all this stuff is evolving, you know, very quickly. Obviously, there's some core technologies that this is based on, things like, as Sue mentioned, GPS for location, and of course, you know, cell signal and whatnot. One significant core technology that's going to have a potentially major effect on all sort of AR is 5G. The ability that 5G has to you know, have massively higher bandwidth will enable some significant shifts of where the computing resources are and how quickly audio in our case can get to somebody listening, so latency is reduced. So all of that is very important. Also, location positioning can be improved by 5G as well. So instead of GPS error bars, which are, you know, on a good day, plus or minus 10 to 15 feet, on a bad day are, you know, plus or minus 50 feet, which is, you know, at Manzanar, maybe not a huge deal in certain cases, but if you're inside or otherwise, you know, needing more specific location, that can be a big problem. So yeah, these sort of core technologies that improve will, you know, as those improvements happen and as they get, you know, sort of spread out to consumer devices and become more available, then things like Roundware will be able to take advantage of those and be able to position listeners much more precisely, and will be able to use re-architect based on the capacity of these systems. So yeah, I mean, I think 5G is a really big one for AR, generally speaking. Roundware itself right now is mainly focused on location-based audio. So in other words, hearing audio when you are within a certain range of a certain physical location. I am working now a lot on adding directionality to that as well. So not only do you hear audio when you're close to where that audio object is positioned, but you can also, as you spin around, the audio object sort of stays persistently in one location. So it kind of feels like you're walking by it, or it feels like it's more of an actual physical object that is creating that sound, which is, sort of adds another level of realism and immersion to the experience, which is something that's, I think is very important. Those technologies are not great now. I mean, you could definitely say, oh, it's coming from over there. It doesn't really sound like it's a person standing next to you because you're still using headphones and whatnot. But there's a level of believability that is increased in that case. And in our project, we're not trying to make you think that those people are standing there. We're just trying to, give you the benefit of having, that person's experience sort of, sitting on your shoulder and talking to you for a little bit. So
yeah, I would also add that all the developments in technology are, for us, one of the big challenges or questions that's constantly coming up is how to balance those developments with accessibility. And so, thinking about how many people visiting the site will have smartphones, how many will have unlimited data, how many will have 5G when 5G is more prevalent. If we design something that is super high tech and super new, and uses a lot of data, are we going to just explode people's phones? And so kind of, because I know that's how it works, Halsey.
Oh yeah.
You're just exploding phones everywhere.
As the technical person.
But, so I think, and I'm sure that's something that many of the attendees wrestle with as well, how to balance sort of what new technology enables and then how many people are going to be able to access that.
Absolutely.
Before I might move on to any additional questions, it is now 1 p.m. and traditionally what we do is we roll past the time a little bit if the speakers are available to continue taking questions just for a few minutes, if we're able to do that. And
sure.
If not, that's fine. So I also wanted to remind our attendees, if you do have a question to ask in person, don't hesitate to use the raise hand function and I'll activate your voice so you can have more of a conversation with our speakers. But while I keep an eye out for any of that, I saw a question about the physical fabric of a site and how critical you think that physical fabric is in telling the story, and would you advocate for more, for example, more reconstructions or more archaeological activity at the site if you think it might help sort of augment the story?
That's a really interesting question. I think that I have sort of two sides to this, and I'll be interested to hear, Sue, what you have to say as well. I think it's really great that this site does have some reconstructed buildings, because it's just really, really useful to walk into one of those and be like, oh my gosh, this is where X number of people were, had to live for years. And it's really, really useful to say that. That said, what also I find very, very useful in particular for our project is walking around the site and being able to see the traces of where the buildings used to be, seeing these foundations, seeing, stones that outlined the latrine area, or you name it. There's lots of sort of archaeological objects there that are not necessarily, officially noted or tracked. And the notion of wanting to look for those and explore those and get enhancements as to what they are through your ears is really very exciting, and I think leads to some enhanced sort of imagination that you can use as an experiencer, as a listener. So I kind of see it going both ways. So I'm not really sure where the sweet spot is, but it felt to me like Manzanar has a pretty is certainly has a bit of that balance, allowing for both of those. So Sue, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's space for both. I think they both offer a very different experience, and both are important. I would add that, you know, the barracks at Manzanar, the recreated buildings there, they have their own audio exhibits that are in a much more kind of didactic mode, where it's, you know, hear the story of, you know, this person as they arrived and what they experienced, and it's much more kind of linear and sort of delineated. Well, same things, but you know, whereas I think our experience is more about having people, and you know, they're more like receiving information. Whereas I think one of the things about our project is we're encouraging people to wander around the site, and it's a little more reflective, and it's a little more, you know, we want people to wonder, to kind of like use their imaginations a little bit more than if they're just looking at what's already there. But I think both are very important parts of experiencing the site.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to type a response here. So maybe I'll continue for a few more minutes, maybe about 5 minutes more or so. And if Chris has anything to bring forward, that's fine too. I'm going to ask the question from Sherry. She's asking, what methods of outreach did you think were most successful in your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we haven't really done much of the outreach yet because all the projects are sort of in progress right now. But I think that's definitely a question that we wrestle with. For sure, you know, Halsey can speak to, with audio projects, it's a little hard because they're invisible, right? So, and obviously we don't want to just go put neon signs around Manzanar, this historical site, that say, you know, like download our app or whatever. So how do you draw attention to this project? And I think partnering with organizations is a huge piece of it. So for example, the Little Tokyo exhibit with the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival, we thought was a really great fit because of their long history in the community, and then also because of their outreach capacities and the ability to kind of situate it within a larger body of programming. Certainly at Manzanar itself, working with National Park Service and some of their existing programming, and sort of building events around it. Because otherwise, you know, you can go at any time. It's not like a film screening. You can just visit Manzanar, download the app, and experience the project whenever you want, which is a pro, I think, in terms of people being able to access it, but then also makes the outreach question, there's not as much of a kind of fixed event to build things around. But yeah, that's always a work in process, yeah.
I mean, one of the questions that I had was, have the current socio-political, biological situations that we find ourselves in today changed the way that your interpretation is working? Because sometimes when you have a historic event, and we're obviously in a historic event now, and contrasting or comparing the two can really bring forth some compelling stories, I think.
Yeah, I mean, our current situation seems to affect virtually everything in one way or another, and everything from, you know, the stories, as you mentioned, but also like, what does, you know, when we can't go outside and experience things physically, what does an augmented reality, you know, installation mean? I mean, what can it do? What does it just not work anymore? I mean, there's all these sorts of questions that come up about even the core technologies and whatnot. And, you know, is there some asynchronicity to an audio AR experience that could still be used and could kind of persist through this age of social distancing? And there's lots of questions about that as far as the, you know, the stories and the you know, I'm doing another project now that's collecting stories about how people are managing their lives throughout, you know, the lockdown, or whatever you want to call it, the social distancing, et cetera. And that's, you know, obviously a wonderful contributory sort of opportunity. And so I think there's lots of tie-ins there. The specificness of the pandemic right now is, you know, it's there's this unfortunate fear of and demonization of the other that's happening with, you know, I call this COVID-19. Some other people call this a different name for the virus that refers to where it came from. And, you know, there's a certain demonization that goes along with that. And that's you know, they bombed Pearl Harbor. My neighbor who is, you know, great grandfather came from there must also be bad. I mean, that those are unfortunately, they seem to be the kinds of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had discussions, you know, especially with some of the things that were happening last summer, but then certainly now where we're like, gee, we wish this wasn't quite as relevant as it is becoming, you know, could do with a little less relevance, you know, but I think that's, yeah, certainly some of these themes are really resonating with what's happening now. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even though some of our location-specific plans are up in the air, we want to get the website launched soon so that people can go to the website to record stories, because it may be bringing up these sort of connections for them as well. And everyone has a lot of free time, so, you know.
I don't know what those people are with free time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to be the bad person here, and I'm going to end the meeting, and just to keep us somewhat on time. But I also wanted, before we close, I wanted to ask one final question, and then I'll remind people to leave feedback at californiapreservation.org/e for today's program, and you'll find the link in the chat box. Sue also mentioned that there's a California Humanities Survey, and you'll find the link to that in the chat box. So please leave feedback there as well if you're able to. And finally, the question that I'm going to choose for the last one, even though we didn't cover them all, was, once you're done with this project, whenever that happens, if you had to choose one historic site to continue the work, what would you choose? Maybe another internment camp. It doesn't necessarily need to be an internment camp. Where would you go next?
Wow.
Oh, wow. John, you're putting us on the spot here with this final question. This is not a way for us to sign off. Let me think. I mean, we have certainly discussed other internment camps in the sense that it would just be an extension of, you know, more than 10,000 voices, another 10,000 voices or whatever, because there's obviously equally interesting, tragic stories at all of these locations. That's, you know, gosh, I mean, you know, if you want to go big or go home, you go to 9/11, you know, you go to ground zero and you do that. I mean, that's, you know, that's kind of being done a bit already with the museum there and whatnot, but the individual, you know, personal stories that anybody could leave is not quite as open, I don't think, but I don't know. So I'm not having a good.
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the one hand, I would say literally any site right now. I would love to leave my house and go somewhere and work on a location specific project. But yeah, I mean, I would say for me, I don't have any specific sites in mind. But I think one thing for me that makes things always interesting, it's not necessarily sites of exclusively, you know, tragedy or injustices, but it's where interesting confluences of stories have happened. So one thing that's really wonderful about working at Manzanar is not only that there is such a rich archive of oral history to pull from, but that also there is a larger history of the site, and it's really interesting how that's intersected with Manzanar. For example, there's a long indigenous history with the Lone Pine Paiute. You know, there's a long history of environmental actions that have occurred there and sort of injustices in their own right. And so I think what's interesting for me is always looking at the way that different histories have intersected. So places where that's happened.
Great. Well, thank you both again, and we really appreciate your time. And just a reminder to everybody to leave feedback at those forums and join us for the conference next week. This is connected to a different conference session on virtual reality as well, so you'll see the other side of telling the story in terms of a different method. So thank you both again, and we hope you have a great day, and feel free to email us if you want to send any additional questions to the panelists. So,
all right, thanks everybody.
Thank
you,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks for attending. Thank you, John and Christine.